Popper Etude 6. It's a piece that most cellists play at some point during their career at least once, if not 2, 3, or like me, 4 times. It's a piece that is very hard sometimes for tension, especially in younger cellists. So I'm here to provide some tips that have helped me as I learned it, and hopefully will be of help to you. Let's go. Don't be tricked by the word etude. Etudes are meant as to help us express ourselves in a more clear manner, and that is really the most essential thing in music, is that we express what the music is saying. Just because it's an etude doesn't mean that the composer didn't have something to say. And I think for me, playing etudes a lot of times are the most fun because you can make your own stories around it because you don't know as much about the background of the piece. So it helps in technical studies to actually be aware of what's going on in the music. And a lot of times when we focus on the technique a little bit too much, we actually create tension because we're not doing what we were made to do, and we're not allowing ourselves to express what the music is saying. So, play musically. Tip number 2, change things up. So a lot of times when we are studying any piece, we create a sense of normalcy. And that normalcy often makes us less aware of our bodies and how tense we are in certain areas. And so what you can do to alter that sense of normalcy is change things up, like change the bowing. So start up, instead of starting down bow, start up bow. Change the part of the bow that you play in. Play with rhythms. An example of like rhythms that you can do is or changing it up and making sure that just be creative with it. The more you change it up, the more aware you become, especially with the rhythms, because your rhythms work on your left hand balance, and left hand balance is often what suffers in this etude, because we have to get into some kind of awkward positions, and we put our hands in compromised situations when we're trying to reach those positions. One more thing I would add for changing things up is sometimes changing things up actually causes tension, and what you have to do is make sure that you're breathing. So a lot of times we hold our breath when we're doing things new, and our breath is one of the most powerful things in releasing tension. So if you're aware of your breath while you do these new exercises, it can be really helpful, and it gives your brain power to think about what you're doing. Another thing to think about when you're changing things is contact point. If your right hand is shifting all over the place, it's hard for your left hand to think. But if your right hand is stable, it's a lot easier for your left hand to move freely. Tip number 3. Find specific places that you can release. One example is measure 7. This measure creates release in 2 ways. The hand positioning is slightly different than the rest of the etude up until that point. And so the simple positioning of a scale helps to free the hand. The other way that it releases tension is by having a crescendo written. Crescendos can be really helpful because they make, if we want to do them successfully, we have to open our right arm. Another way to release is the accents, actually. By using a little bit more bow, on the accents, and leaning into those notes more, it actually forces us to release, because we have to focus more on the right hand instead of the left hand at that point. Tip 4. Advice for the dreaded middle section. So like any other place in the etude, you can break it up into rhythms. And this is really helpful. But one thing that might be a little bit more helpful, actually, is like breaking it into shifts. So once you can do each shift 5 to 10 times successfully, you can chain each shift. So instead of doing one shift and then stopping, you can do 2 shifts and then stop. Like that, and you can chain them together until you can do the whole phrase. The hardest part about this section is the thumb position. And what you can do is, there's a couple ways to map your thumb position. One is by knowing the hand positions. There's a few. So there's one that goes from thumb, half step, hold, hold. There's one. There's another main one that's hold, half, and then the other one is hold, hold, half. If you know these 3 main positions, it's really easy to do this section, because you can, after each shift, call to yourself which position your hand is in. So for example, at the beginning, it's a whole half, and then it shifts. So whole half, and then it shifts down to half, and then it goes whole, half, whole. And then it's the same position in the next one, whole, half, whole. So you can, before each shift, say this position, and it will really help solidify where your hand should be going. Think about arm height. And this applies to both your left hand and your right hand. If your arm isn't at the right height, it can actually be really hard to play in tune. So if I'm playing all the way down here, I have to put my finger in really weird positions to be able to play it. But if I raise my hand in a natural position, and my strings, it's almost like I'm pulling them to the left, because I'm using bigger muscles in my back when I raise my elbow. We're still using the fingertips, but it makes it so that we don't have to mangle our hands to play in tune, and it's actually way harder to play in tune if we're mangling our hands. The other thing is coordination. Your right hand can really help your left hand if it's at the right height as well. So and the movement doesn't have to be super big, but it really helps to release tension if your hand is at the right height. So I would suggest practicing slowly and just finding where each note feels balanced and is not tense. Tip 6 and the final tip. Practice with a metronome. Your metronome, in the words of my one of my class teachers, is your best friend. This means that you want to spend as much time as you can with this etude. Not at fast tempos. If you increase the tempo too fast, you'll end up being 1, messy, 2, stressed out, and 3, super tense. So I would encourage you to start at a slow tempo. I had a teacher say, don't play faster than you can play all the way through. So for each section, if you can't play all the way through that section at that tempo, then you shouldn't be doing that tempo. So do it at a tempo that you can play and gradually increase it. And that wraps it up for Popper 6. I hope this advice video was of help to some of you young cellists out there, and I'll see you soon in the next video.